What are you booing me for? I'm not the Prime Minister. Oh, I see. It's a bring your own booze party. So what best describes Boris Johnson this Jubilee weekend? Rotten core, failure of leadership, unacceptable culture and erosion of trust, indefensible, misleading, mistruths, not credible, rule breaker, debilitating, evasive, corrosive, damaging distraction, toxic culture. Oh, pretty damning. Not my words, of course. Perish the thought. The words of some of Mr Johnson's own Tory MPs to describe the shenanigans in 10 Downing Street during lockdown and his various contradictory and some would say unconvincing efforts to explain them away. The PM's allies have in turn dismissed his critics as self-indulgent, narcissistic and contemptuous. Clearly, all is not love and peace within our ruling party. There's been a ceasefire of sorts during the Jubilee celebrations, at least among Tory MPs, if not all of the public, some of whom made their feelings clear as he entered St Paul's on Friday. But as the Jubilee passes into history, Tory hostilities will recommence with the return of Parliament tomorrow. Mr Johnson could face a vote of no confidence before the week is out. There'll almost certainly be one before the month is over. Sweet June, backdrop to a bitter denouement in the Tory civil war over wine, cake and karaoke. Good evening, welcome to the Andrew Neil Show, which tonight we devote to Boris Johnson. The Telegraph's Madeline Grant comes straight from her own Partygate outside Buckingham Palace. She's joined by the FT's Stephen Bush, who slept through the whole celebration. I'll be speaking to them later. But first, MPs return to Westminster tomorrow amid mounting speculation over a confidence vote in Boris Johnson's leadership following the number 10 Partygate affair. I'm joined by Business Minister Paul Scully. Welcome to the programme.
Good
Andrea Leadsom, Tory MP, until recently the Prime Minister's cheerleader, says there have been unacceptable failures of leadership. Is she a navel-gazing narcissist?
No, I wouldn't describe any of my colleagues with those sort of terms that you used in at the beginning. But I wouldn't. There's clearly a difference of opinion, and it's right that that we see this to the end because we've got to concentrate on the things that matter to people on a day-to-day basis. But when Andrea talks about a lack of leadership, there have been serious problems within Number 10, with the ethos of in Number 10, the culture in Number 10, which the Prime Minister has clearly tried to make some changes, which Sue Gray herself said need time to bed in and welcome those changes.
After he made the changes.
She did say that after he made those changes.
What about Mark Harper, former Tory Chief Whip, MP obviously as well? He says Mr Johnson is, quote, no longer fit for his great office. Is he wrong?
I believe he is. I believe he is because well, look, as I say, there's a clear difference of opinion here. People are looking at how we move forward from Partygate, and concentrate on the cost of living issues, on the war on our doorstep in Europe, all those big things that people are worried about on a day-to-day basis. And clearly, there's a difference of opinion. People
know these things, but a lot of them still want him to go. And I'm talking about Tories, not people who are anti-Tory. Tory MP Elisa Cairns. Hard-working, law-abiding Tories feel ashamed of the Prime Minister's behaviour and what happened in Downing Street. Don't you feel ashamed?
I feel really saddened and angered by some of the scenes that we've seen described in the Sue Gray report in Number 10. Well, I can't say that because I'm just saying. Well, you know, it's right that the people that were there have either moved on or been fined
because that culture.
Well, that culture.
He was the guy in charge.
But the culture and ethos in Number 10 at that time was wrong and it had to change. And I think the changes that have been put into place now are, have made that change, that appropriate change.
Well, even with these changes, Steve Baker, you know him well, an MP, a leading Tory Brexiteer, big supporter of Boris Johnson. At one stage, he says to the Prime Minister, quote, "The gig's up."
Yeah, look, Andrew,
it is up, isn't it?
Andrew, there's a load of people that you can read a lot of quotes from different colleagues.
Oh, don't worry, I've got a lot more.
Who are obviously concerned, and some people have undoubtedly put their letters in. I have no idea how many people do.
No, and I'm not asking you about that because no one knows.
Well, nobody knows, exactly. And there are people that have been more vocal than others. But what we do know, that, and I think you said it right at the beginning, that the party serves the country best when it is unified. People look for a unified, strong leadership in government, and that's what we've got to show if we're going to tackle the cost of living issue.
But it's not just Tory MPs, it's not just people who've always been opposed to Boris Johnson. There are many of them around you. I mean, take a look at this. Why do you think that he's now so widely despised and derided that he's booed even by cheering royalists?
No, I think
a Tory Prime Minister booed by royalists going into St Paul's.
I think politics is obviously a divisive issue. Politicians tend to be divisive characters and they are satirised by people up and down the land. The coverage that is there will have pushed this, but politicians have been booed all over, through time immemorial, really, haven't they? I would
suggest that those who are waiting outside St Paul's of a morning to see the royal family are not natural anti-Tories.
Well, it's not something I would want to say clearly. It's something that
Did you ever expect to see it?
I hadn't really thought about it, frankly. But
no, because it was unthinkable until Friday morning.
Well, it's not really something that just comes across my mind to think about. But nonetheless, it's disappointing because I come back to it. We want to focus on the things that matter.
Indeed,
and what we're seeing at the moment, we are seeing the column in Cheers. We're seeing time on television, and understandably so, because it is the story that is there. But that's what's dominating the headlines. So clearly, it's on people's minds.
But you're now consistently behind Labour in the polls. You're set to lose the Wakefield by-election badly. You'll probably lose the safe Tory seat of Tiverton on the same day. The Prime Minister's personal ratings have tanked. He's now even less popular than his party. In what way is Boris Johnson still a winner?
Boris Johnson has got all the big calls right over the last few years when he's tackled COVID and got Brexit done in terms of actually ending the stasis that we had in Parliament.
But they know all that, and he's still got terrible personal ratings.
Because what he now needs to do is get back to the big calls, i.e. tackling the cost of living issues, all of the kind of things that affect people on a day-to-day basis. Because come the next election, we're in mid-term at the moment, but come the next general election, people are going to be voting for what they feel in their pocket, what they feel in terms of the confidence as a country, not necessarily on a mid-term blues situation.
But even Tory members have turned against him. I mean, look at this Conservative Home poll. It's a Conservative website. There's the famous, well-known Tory politicians there. Ben Wallace-Heyes, the Defence Minister. Then we go to the second list. The only one with a negative rating is your Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, -15. No one comes near that. He's by far the most unpopular politician in the government, even among Tory activists.
This is a monthly poll that they do with members.
Yes,
and
members.
We've seen Priti Patel was in negative. She's now gone back to positive because she's getting the calls right on on immigration. Rishi was negative and he's gone positive because having put £37 billion worth into the cost of support into the cost of living crisis, people are actually seeing what he's doing in government and governing, and that's what I think you'll find with these issues. Those polls will go up and down. Well, according to the news at the time.
You say that, but I would suggest that the reason why his own ratings have tanked, not just with the country at large, but with his own members, as that poll there shows, is that people who never trusted him that much anyway now really don't trust him, with good reason. I mean, let's look at how he's dissembled over Partygate. First of all, this is from him, there were no parties. Then, well, if there were parties, I didn't know. Then, OK, I knew, but I didn't attend. Then I attended, but only for a few minutes. And then the most recent line, well, I had to attend to go and show leadership and bolster morale. That's the latest line. I mean, he lies like a rug and takes us for fools, doesn't he?
No, look, I think this...
But what bit of any of that's true?
I think the point with the, things like the Ministerial Code is, did he willfully mislead the House? And, whatever else you think, and I know you've known the Prime Minister, obviously, for a long time in his professional life, one thing we will both agree, he's not stupid. All those photos that he had in the Sue Gray report, all the photos that you had in the event that you actually got fined for, were taken by an official photographer. No one takes an official photographer in to a situation when they're actually knowingly breaking the law.
But if he misled Parliament, which is clear it is, the question is, did he do so intentionally? It's clear from the first part of the Gray report came out at the end of January that he had misled Parliament. Whether he did so intentionally was left open, but he had misled. Why did he not go immediately to the Commons, as the Ministerial Code demands, and apologise for even inadvertently misleading Parliament?
Well, I mean,
he didn't do it.
Yeah,
Why?
Look, I don't know, but one thing I would absolutely agree on, the way that we as a government have handled this issue, this should have been actually dealt with before Christmas. I mean, I think one of the things that I regret that it's stretched out for so long because we didn't handle it particularly well. Communication.
The rules by not admitting he had misled Parliament.
No, I think the point was that, as I say, I don't think he didn't willfully mislead Parliament for the reasons that I said.
That's not the issue. We don't know that
because
yet.
I know that...
even if he had been unwitting, he should have gone back. Immediately he knew that, and he didn't.
But I think what he wanted to do, rightly, was to wait for the full Sue Gray report to come out and then actually make his case and make the points openly. He always said at the time... I remember he made it on a number of occasions. He says, once Sue Gray comes out, the report comes out, I will have plenty more to say about this.
He didn't, because the moment the report came out, you then told us we have to move on and talk about the cost of living. But, I mean, I want to come back to this issue of trust, because does it not beg a belief that Downing Street, which became party central during the lockdown, this is about the only nightclub in London still open, yet the Prime Minister who lives and works there says he knew nothing about it? No, that's just nonsense.
It's a big place, Downing Street. There's 400 or 500 people that work there. You can't know everything that is going on in that building.
There were scores of people having... Paul Scully, there was red wine on the walls, photocopiers covered in red wine, fights, a karaoke machine, music blaring, his kid's garden swing broken, the place heaving till the early hours, and he sees or knows nothing?
I think, well, he lives above number 11, I think, doesn't he? So I'm saying if I was in my building...
from all over the place.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I feel if I was in my building, my department executive, for example, I sit on the 8th floor of that, I'm not sure I would know much about what was going on.
He doesn't know what his own staff... He just has to look. You've been in number 11. You look out the window, you see the garden. You see people partying.
Well, as I say, I don't know. I don't know about who knew what when in that regard. But I think he's made his case clear. Well, in terms of what he knew and what he didn't know at the given time.
Part of his case is that he had to go to these farewell parties, or whatever you want to call them, because as the leader, he had to keep morale high. He was doing his duty as a leader. So that means those of us who cancelled leaving parties because we knew they were against the rules, were failing in leadership.
Well, he didn't get fined for those. So obviously, the Met Police has investigated that. Sue Grazer investigated that, and so that.
So
clearly,
it was all right. He was doing his duty to go to a farewell party where the whole country, in hospitals, where nurses were working all hours and sometimes leaving because of the stress. They had no farewell parties. That was a failure of leadership on the NHS?
No. So I think there's two things just to slightly separate. First of all, as I say, he didn't get fined, so therefore the Metropolitan Police in their investigation didn't feel that he broke the rules on that. But you're right to point out the fact that I'll come back to the ethos in number 10, that there is a sense of bubble. We call it the Westminster bubble in Downing Street. It's a bubble within a bubble, and when you are in close proximity for such long hours for those people, you can actually sometimes lose the emotional intelligence to actually reflect on what was happening in the rest of the country.
That's why he's the leader. He's not meant to do that, but he didn't intervene and stop it. And and one of the arguments is, we were all working so hard, it was a difficult time. If everybody was working so hard in Downing Street, why was there a regular wine time every Friday afternoon at 4 p.m.? and staff were drunk and disorderly on the premises at 4 a.m. What's that got to do with hard work?
Well, I wouldn't excuse that at all. This is what I was talking about
But
the ethos. This is what I was talking about the ethos.
Your
and culture.
leader allowed it to happen.
I'm not sure. I don't know, because you're saying he allowed it to happen. If he knew that was there, and if he was sort of saying you crack on, then absolutely he knew. But I'm not sure that was the case.
Isn't the truth, Paul Scully, is that those who were really working hard in Downing Street were those having to clear up the spilled red wine, the vomit, and the empty bottles left by Johnson's
staff. I
think
that's the thing that actually frustrated and upset me most about the Sue Gray report, was actually not only did they have to do that, but apparently some of the behaviour that was aimed at the cleaners and the people who look after the building. I think that was
abiding by the rules.
That was absolutely appalling.
Trying to control people who were not doing their job and not abiding by the rules.
Yeah, and I think that was appalling. That was appalling, and that's the culture that said that needed to have changed, and I'm glad it is starting to change.
Final question for you. What's the worst outcome for your party? Mr. Johnson loses, or he scrapes home and staggers on as the walking wounded?
I think what we need to happen. We may well have a vote of confidence. I think he will win that, and I think what he will then need to be doing. We will all be looking for him to do is to govern well, to get back onto those to get those onto those big things.
You think there will be a vote of confidence?
I don't know, but I mean, you know, if
it doesn't, maybe not this week,
it may well happen, and if
out.
it does happen, the Prime Minister, I know, will face it down. But we've got to get back to whatever happens. We've got to get back to governing, to tackle the things that people want us to do on a day-to-day basis, not continuingly, but understandably, but continually to look back at 2 years previously.
All right, Paul Scully, thank you for being with us this Jubilee weekend.
Thank you.
After the break, I'll be speaking to Madeleine and Stephen, who are listening to that interview. Welcome back. Let's speak to Madeleine and Stephen. Madeleine, I'll come to you first. Some are expecting a confidence vote this week. It was clear the Minister does think that there is a confidence vote coming at some time. But some Tories are also saying, look, it would make more sense, if we want to get rid of them, to wait till the by-elections on June the 23rd. We'll probably lose both of them. That's a real nightmare to lose Labour in the north in Wakefield, to the Lib Dems in the south in Tiverton, and then we can get rid of them. Yeah. What say you?
Well, I think that latter point is probably more accurate. But the trouble is you cannot control the timing of these things because the letters are being handed in anonymously. And also at any point, an MP can choose to withdraw their letters. And the rebels on the Tory benches are from completely disparate groups of the party. You've got your Caroline Noakses, you've got your Libertarians, Steve Baker, you've got the One Nation guys. And they may or may not be working. Much depends on whether they're working in tandem. But I think that if they were hoping to remove the Prime Minister, it would be far more sensible to have it after, as you described, the absolute nightmare situation of bleeding seats in the north and the south to the Lib Dems and Labour respectively. But if I were the number 10 office, I would want the vote to happen sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and now, my understanding is number 10 does want to vote sooner rather than later because it thinks it wins if it's before the by-elections. Stephen, that's the strong point that Madeleine makes, though, isn't it? That this is not a kind of united group of rebels plotting his downfall. The names that will trigger a vote are simply going to happen by, if it happens at all, by accretion. And that makes the timing harder to control.
Yeah, it's that old line about how a crowd is an organisation where the stupidest member directs the strategy for the whole of it. And it's the same with the parliamentary party. But that's also why, although this is a very debilitating coup for the Prime Minister to face, he's still quite well placed to weather it out because all of these people can agree that they are currently not well led and they need some form of change. But once you get to the next stage of this process, suddenly you have to agree on what that form of change might be. And I think at that stage, that's why a majority of the parliamentary party would go, OK, let's stick to what we have now, precisely because the opposition is so broad-based.
Even if they've lost Wakefield and Tiverton? I mean, if they lose Wakefield really badly, that's one of their red wall seats, Sunday Times poll suggests they will. Losing Tiverton, well, I think that Tory majority, 25,000, never been anything but Tiverton, he would still win?
Yeah, I think...
Never been anything but Tory.
I think that, if they lose Tiverton, that will panic Conservatives who are in Liberal Dem-facing seats, and they'll remember that awful period for them in the 90s and noughties where they just could not get out from under the Liberal Democrat menace. But some people will say, oh, look, losing seats to the Lib Dems in by-elections, this happens to governments all the time. And they will also still have this problem of, well, look, you want to change from the Prime Minister, but to what? And you can't beat out with Nout.
Madeleine, it's often said, I often see it in the papers, that he can count on what they call the payroll vote, which is about 140 MPs that are in some ways, from cabinet to private secretaries, part of the government. But any confidence vote is anonymous. And the Tories themselves say that their MPs are the most duplicitous electorate in the world. I mean, I would suggest he cannot count on the payroll vote.
No, I don't think he can. I'm not even sure he could count on the entirety of his cabinet because he does not reward loyalty well, that man. I mean, we saw poor old Paul Scully here trying to defend really terrible behaviour, and it's a very difficult thing to do. And historically, Number 10 has a habit of making their ministers go out to bat for them at really difficult times. You know, poor Robert Jenrick was sent out to defend them over Barnard Castle, and then they sacked him anyway. I mean, there's not a great incentive to go out and bat for this administration because it's chaotic, and the constant U-turning often leaves their ministers looking very silly the next day. So, I mean, even at the very top end, I'm not sure they could count on all of the payroll.
It does seem, however, Stephen, that the cabinet remains pretty much with him, at the moment anyway. But if he only scrapes home and the cabinet turns against him, as it turned against Margaret Thatcher, can he just stumble on as he says he will?
He's kind of at the just stumbling along stage now, right? And he has actually been since that first loss of a by-election to the Lib Dems back in North Shropshire. Now, yes, it was the right decision policy-wise to exit those lockdown restrictions when we did at the start of the year. But let's face it, he didn't do that because he felt that was the right decision. He did that because the parliamentary party was in a very fixed mind and he knew he had to do it. And I think we're already at the stage of the Prime Minister's political life when he's the prisoner of his own party, drifting along. Now, thus far, he's had the good fortune and actually the collective instinct of the Tory party hasn't been that bad in terms of dealing with the major policy challenges, but there's no guarantee that will continue to be the case.
You do get the feeling, and we don't know for sure, and we don't know the number of letters going in, but you do get the feeling that the skids are under him, that it's going against him. Maybe not terminally, but he's fighting for his life at the moment. This is the most serious, dangerous point in his whole political career.
Yes, I would agree with that for sure. And that's actually a very good argument for why things cannot carry on like this, that it's an unsustainable way of governing, because so much of Number 10's energies right now are being spent trying to just survive for the next week. It's a kind of hand-to-mouth political existence. It's impossible for them to implement anything further reaching than what's happening. How can we placate our MPs for another week? And also the energy that's spent by the Whip's office and others in Number 10, just kind of ringing around their flock and working out what the lie of the land is. Everything is being devoted to keeping Boris Johnson in charge, and that's not a way to govern.
Stephen, in a sentence or two at most, will Boris Johnson still be Prime Minister come the Tory conference at the start of October this year?
I think barring a massive increase in the competence of the various leadership campaigns against him, yes, just for want of anything better.
OK. Madeleine?
I don't know. I actually think David Davis, when he did his for the sake of God go speech, he said we could find ourselves a situation come autumn where we're still in this situation, we're still limping on. And so far, I think he was possibly right about that.
So you think he will still be there at the Tory conference?
I think it's entirely possible because the vote might happen too quickly and he might survive it. And we know that Boris Johnson is the kind of character where he will try to cling on at all costs. He won't make a dignified exit.
Well, we've recorded both of these predictions. We'll be back. Now, just before we go, a couple of things to look out for in the week ahead. Of course, all eyes will be on Tory MPs to see if enough of them rebel to trigger a confidence vote on the Prime Minister. The magic number is 54. Someone who was only recently favourite to succeed Mr Johnson, that's Chancellor Rishi Sunak, will be explaining to MPs his plans to tackle the cost of living crisis. The Tory leadership, of course, will be far from his thoughts. That's it for this week. Just time for me to have some tea and a marmalade sandwich. And like many famous folk, I always have one with me.